Mark Rogers TV diving into the Big Ten for a wrap on National Signing Day. We bring in Brian Towle of Corn Nation to talk about Nebraska and how the Huskers did with just about a consensus number 31 class across the board. Hey, Brian, thanks so much for joining us. Let's dive into this thing and talk about some of those guys that you really like that the Huskers brought in.
Not a big class, 20 players. Nebraska could probably fit 19. Probably their best effort considering you go through an entire coaching and support office change. They kept 10 kids that they had, got 9 more. Pretty defensive class in this. Approximately 12 kids are defensive, 7 are offensive. And you have 1 long snapper that was needed to be switched out. The home runs, I think, of this class, simply the top 2 defensive players in the state of Colorado, Avery Anderson and Eric Lee, both defensive backs. Anderson's going to be a cornerback. Lee's going to be a safety, number 1 and number 2 in the state of Colorado. Big steal, I think, out of the state of Oklahoma is Jalin Barnett. Big kid, 6'7", out of Lawton, Oklahoma, over there on the southwest corner of the state. Pretty big steal. Same high school as Hall of Famers Will Shield and NFLer Mike Minner, who came to Nebraska from there too. And then you got a couple guys that should be pretty decent role players. Matt Snyder from California, tight end. Only tight end that Nebraska got. Also a couple kids in the Davis twins, Carlos and Khalil, defensive line and defensive end. From Blue Springs, some of the best players in Missouri. Best player in Kansas, Christian Gaylord, an offensive guard. Nebraska definitely could have done better in this class. The big glaring omission is quarterback. It was simply a thing where Nebraska's previous under Bo Pelini didn't really recruit the position very well, and Mike Riley came in with 2 months ago and really didn't have time, or they were behind the 8 ball so much in quarterback that they didn't get one in this class. That's probably the biggest glaring omission. The only other thing I would say of this class is had a lot of linebackers. They got up to 5 guys who could play linebacker for Nebraska. That was a big need for Mike Riley when he saw what he had in the Nebraska defense. He had to go out and get linebackers, especially right after the bowl game dead period. He went out and got linebackers. Adrian Talon is a guy he got. A couple other guys. They kept Mohamed Berry. Did whiff on a couple at the interest hall. They wanted out of state of Georgia. He went to Missouri. Overall, pretty good haul for the Huskers.
Yeah, Brian, was there an obvious situation where possibly Bo Pelini had a player that was really seriously considering Nebraska that possibly Riley lost, or vice versa, maybe some player or a group of players that were completely off the radar that Riley was able to reel in?
I think one of the best things is that Mike Riley kind of re-recruited everybody on the roster. The Huskers lost a couple players in Reuben Jones, who went to Michigan. Probably going to lose him anyway, no matter what. Kendall Bussey ended up going to Texas A&M, but he left Nebraska to flip to Tennessee, and he flipped to A&M at the last moment. So really, kind of, Mike Riley did a great job in re-recruiting himself to the kids that committed under Bo Pelini and said, hey, you committed to a school, you just didn't commit to a head coach. And I think Riley came in and did a great job with that. One of the first things he did was that he made sure that he went to every important, kids. He didn't go to every kid. Some kids he did not happen to see, but he went to every kid that was important to the class and made sure that they went and he re-recruited them. And it was a big deal. Guys like Stanley Morgan, Christian Gaylord, Michael Decker, they got Barnett. Guys like Dyshawn Neal out of Omaha, who was one of the best players in the state of Nebraska, could have gone to Michigan, could have gone to Oregon, stayed inside the state to the Huskers, and that's a big deal to Nebraska because they tend to suffer, especially in the 500-mile radius around Nebraska and such, between Chicago, Denver, Dallas even. That seems to hurt a little bit. Riley went out and got those guys and made a point in his presser to tell everybody that, hey, we need to do well inside that radius. we need to do well around home. What do we don't get around home, we can go out and get outside of that radius, but we need to do well inside the 500 mile. We need to take care of our needs inside of that. That is a big deal for Mike Riley, and it definitely shows, especially re-recruiting kids that Bo had gotten inside that radius. It wasn't a bad year for it. It's going to be a little bit. It's going to be a little worse this next coming cycle, quote unquote. But still, there's still quality kids that Nebraska could use inside that radius, and Riley wants to get them.
I'm sure that Riley had a number of comments that were pretty much coach speak, the typical comments that you hear after signing a class. We love these kids. These were the ones we targeted and all of that. You mentioned one thing that he said about the 500-mile radius. Was there anything else that was distinct about what he had to say about this recruiting class, or just his recruiting approach in general?
I think the one thing about his recruiting approach was a big deal was that, hey, he had to – a lot of these kids kind of committed to Bo. He wanted him to commit to Nebraska. A lot of these kids were upset that Pelini lost his job, and he came in 4 days later. And one of the first things he did is visit a lot of kids when he was there. The head coach for all of literally 3 days. He admitted he didn't know much about Nebraska tradition or the culture or anything. He didn't know what was there. He just had to sell Mike Riley, the head coach, of what Mike Riley wanted to view the Nebraska Cornhuskers in his mold starting spring practice the next year, and I think he did a really good job of that. And it's something that his staff, led by player personnel Ryan Gunderson, really embraced being open with kids, really embraced being friendly on social media and such. There's a huge social media buzz around Nebraska recruiting these last 2 months. Bo Pelini kind of viewed Twitter as a hindrance sometimes, as something that he didn't really want to use. Gunderson and Riley's crew just happened to just embrace it. Yesterday they had a fax cam on National Signing Day, and they happened to have things like Teletubbies dressed up. They had kind of guys in top hats. They had sharks going around everything. I mean, it's silly to some people, and yeah, I agree with that. But at the same time, it's something that kind of freshened up the mood. And National Signing Day can be boring. I mean, it's 7 hours of basically waiting for a fax to come in from a kid, and you have hat ceremonies, and you have guys droning on TV talking about who's going to be shocks and everything. Nebraska didn't have that much drama on that. They had one hat ceremony. They knew they were going to win, and one hat ceremony they probably weren't going to win. Outside of that, it's something where they injected a little bit of fun, and especially the last 2 months. Very transparent, the staff was, telling everybody where they were going that day. You saw Riley's Twitter. They had Paint the Nation Red. It told exactly what towns they were going to, who they were visiting, and it was interesting to watch and really kind of refreshing, considering that the last staff, it was kind of we'll see if we can get something done, or we'll see if they fit, or such like that. One other thing that's going to be nice to see is Riley has said, hey, we're not going to back off of battles just because maybe we're, the school that is in the not in the driver's seat. He's used to going. His staff used to Oregon State used to having half the budget, half the resources, and still going head to head with schools like Oregon, UCLA, USC, who happened. UCLA and USC did very well yesterday. Guys like Washington, heck, even guys like Boise in the Chris Peterson era. They're used to going against schools like that, having half the budget, having to invent resources that they necessarily now have at Lincoln. And now they see it to where they have to go against the Kansas States, the Iowa States, the Iowas, the Missouris, and they're finding out that they can go head-to-head with them. Heck, he called going head-to-head against Jim Harbaugh for a couple kids fun yesterday. He thought it was really fun. And Harbaugh's already mentioned that, hey, it's going to be hard to go against Mike Riley, especially with the goods now he has in Lincoln. He did lose one kid in Reuben Jones to Jim Harbaugh. He kept Matt Snyder, who was a pretty good insurance plan for when Chris Clark, name of the tight end, who had Michigan in his final three, but he ended up going to UCLA. Matt Snyder was supposed to be the safety pin for that. Well, it didn't happen. Dyshawn Neal was wanted bad by Michigan. Didn't happen. The only thing that's really souring is that there's a safety, Willie Sykes, out of the Houston area that hadn't got a whole heck of a lot of rating and such, primarily because he's a kid in Texas who said he didn't want to go to a Texas school, so a lot of those local guys didn't kind of pay attention to him. And he had him at the 11th hour, literally flipped to Arkansas without even seeing the campus, without, having an official visit, without ever visiting a coach. So that's probably one of the sour things. And it happens. But under the Bo, that would happen 3-4 times a cycle. This time it only happened once. And, it's a kid that didn't really make or break the class. It would probably be something where the high ceiling would make the class better. So it was interesting to watch, a guy be open and talk about recruiting and talk about all the kids that he has. And, and one other thing he mentioned is, hey, I've got to get used to now 110, 120 kids in Lincoln that, I used to only have about 70 or so with walk-ons in Corvallis. So it's going to be interesting to watch him get to know all these kids. And this class is going to help that. It could have gone south. It did go south for a while, but to have a complete coaching philosophy and staff turnover and keep where you were before that firing is pretty good. Mike Riley, probably one of the more underrated jobs. Everybody wants to talk about Harbaugh getting Michigan back into a top 40 status or what Paul Chryst did. I'll argue that says Mike Riley did probably the best job for any coach that took over a program in America, and I'll argue that with anybody. I think it's the truth. I think what Riley took back on, what he had, what never decommitted. He lost Mirko Jerkovic to Ohio State, who was visiting the day before Bo Pelini got fired, and he upgraded with Jalin Barnett. So that's a pretty good thing to me. If you can upgrade guards from one of the top 15 to one of the top 5 in America, that's pretty good. That's my opinion, but I'll definitely argue that Mike Riley probably did the best job when it came to taking over a class and keeping it alive like he did, because you can argue Harbaugh and he maybe gets the shine power and everything, but Riley, as far as substance, I think Mike Riley did a lot better job than Jim Harbaugh did.
Brian Towle of Corn Nation giving us a Nebraska recruiting and National Signing Day report and dropping the name Teletubbies. You're bringing back nightmares for me, raising 2 kids in the mid to late 90s and watching the Teletubbies and getting sick of hearing that garbage.
My bad. It was college kids must have lost a bet. It was a snow day in Lincoln yesterday, so maybe they just got locked into North Stadium and never left, and they said, hey, we'll give you free food if you did that. So.
All right, good stuff, Brian. Always appreciate the time and the rundown and the personnel. We'll hopefully catch up soon, talk about some spring football.
You got it. Absolutely. Spring football is going to be really interesting in Lincoln this year.